Okay. So first off, it's an honor. Thank you, Anthony, Tiffany, Carl, who I had an opportunity to meet last night. And it's just a pleasure to be here. It is a blessing for me at this phase of my life. I guess you can say it's never too late to step up and make a difference in our community and whatever that might be that you're interested in. And just a little background on me, I grew up a child of the 60s in LA in a disenfranchised community that was considered red line that I didn't know at that time. It wasn't something that was discussed as much as it was my parents migrating from Louisiana and Oklahoma, that we pretty much made a way out of no way. And so while I was a child, we bike ride all through my neighborhood, through the parks that were in the area, and then couldn't wait to get in a car and drive in the, I guess, later 70s, and put the bike to the side for a minute, and then picked it back up on my later 20s and 30s and did the AIDS bike ride from San Francisco to LA, and came back and really wanted to join a bike group. But I wanted to see people like me on bikes and joined a group in Inglewood called City of Bicycles. And basically we rode every weekend anywhere from 50 to 100 miles. And so between the AIDS ride and this group where people rode bikes that looked like me, I began to see the community in ways that I never had. You know, I started asking questions because of my love for bicycling that I never asked. And so I think that's, as we start off this presentation, when you ask a question, do you really want to know the answer? And so for me, it opened up Pandora's box as to why my community didn't have bike lanes. And so I guess higher forces that be pretty much said, do you really want to know the answer? And that began my journey in 2000, roughly 11, and a little before, because of becoming an advocate when having children. My daughter's 20, my son is 25. Advocacy just kicked in as a mom. I don't know how many moms do we have in the house? Grandmoms, yeah, aunties. Basically that is really kind of what got me on the advocacy path. And then the bicycling path, in asking that question of why don't I have bike lanes in my community, basically it began to be revealed to me all of the inequities that exist, which was not even really a term used in 2011, transportation equity, and definitely not mobility justice until roughly around 2014, 15. And so basically I began to learn about our major and historic bike riders like Major Taylor, African-American bike riders that I didn't know anything about him when I started cycling as an adult, and also about redlining and about disenfranchised community and why we don't have crosswalks and traffic lights or safe routes to school. So as we go on the journey in this presentation, this really is about my experience of evolving. It's radical, it's hard, it's daring, it's brave. And so what I would say, what I really want to leave you with this evening is, are you radical? Are you ready to be radical? Are you ready to be brave? Because it's stepping out of the old way of operating and moving around and thinking and rewiring, literally, how we see space and what our role can be right where we stand or right where we roll. So as you see, this is my daughter and another student, middle school. And today we'll talk about what mobility justice is from my perspective in the communities that I have worked with over the past 10 years. And we've already had a land acknowledgement, and we'll take another moment of silence to recognize the Native American history and territories here in the Minnesota area. As Anthony mentioned, the foundation that we stand on and that we have evolved into, and speaking about mobility justice, is a name that basically it really identifies the intersectional unsafeties and attacks that people from marginalized groups experience. and public spaces such as the streets, transit systems, and the governance process that lay claim to regulate these spaces. And when we say marginalized groups, we mean Black, Indigenous, people of color, BIPOC communities, people with disabilities, immigrants, trans people, queer people, women, and youth. Since we only have 30 minutes roughly to give this presentation, each slide that I show, obviously we could go into an in-depth conversation on what that means and how that could be applied. I would say that something that I was born into, it was innate within me, was that the way of thinking in terms of a regenerative way, a way of giving, compassion, caring, but strategic and strong and sustainable. I didn't learn about this framework of what's called a strategy framework for just transition until I was in graduate school, which was roughly 5 years ago. But through my grassroots work, from the local to national advocacy work, my approach evolved into relearning truth perspectives. And this particular perspective created by the movement generation in the Bay Area is called the Strategy Framework for a Just Transition. My advocacy work is one that observes and utilizes the available resources and human energy and expertise to transition our communities into regenerative economies. And to be able to do that, we really have to be radical. We really have to believe in this model and in this concept and in this reality. A way of relearning, rethinking, reimagining, and restructuring how we can sustain safety and life. It goes together, which in many cases is not being taught in our academic institutions. So what that means is that we all become teachers, and that this whole experience is an outdoor classroom learning experience. Versus the current reality, which is the extractive economy, the colonized way of thinking, learning, and functioning, a way that has disabled and harmed communities of colors for centuries, and for that matter, humanity and our planet. So this is actually a slide or image that was taken from the Mobility Justice Untokening movement, which really says it in a nutshell that we need to prioritize people over profit, property, and placemaking. Just to go back a little in time and to look at what is an extractive community, I put together a couple of slides that tap into the history as it relates to Black lives and BIPOC lives, and in the areas of building infrastructure, access, and transportation known as mobility. And the Peasley, which is African American, some would say he was partly white, partly Black, what the percentage is, if you have any Black in you, you're Black. He actually violated what's called the Louisiana Separate Car Act in 1890. Which required that equal but separate railroad accommodations for white and non-white passengers. And so we can even see basically just from the photo and the illustration in terms of what is funded and what is not funded. What is working infrastructure and what is disenfranchised. So this has been around in America with us literally since the beginning of the development of transportation and infrastructure. And also just to tap into some of the cycling stories of an African-American cyclist world champion, Major Taylor, who lived between 1878, or his accomplishments were made between 1878 and 1932. He was the first American to achieve the level of cycling and world championship in 1899, and the second Black athlete to win the world championship of any sport. And also with this success and with this knowledge, he also was continuously segregated and had racial profiling and aggression that was laid upon him his entire life. And so this is just an example of the media and the way that basically he was treated in his time, which still continues today. Also, another story of an extractive economy in the mobility system is when the urban planner Robert Moss began building projects in New York during the 1920s. And he bulldozed Black and Latino homes to make way for parks and to build highways through the middle of minority neighborhoods. Moses even made sure that bridges on the parkways connecting New York City to beaches in Long Island were low enough to keep city buses, which would likely carry poor minorities, passing through the community. His practices of architecture and urban planning actually were activated and utilized throughout the United States. In my very community of what's now called West Adams, back in the day, 10, 15, 20 years ago, it was called South LA. We actually had the same types of activities where a community was a 10 freeway, went right through African American and Latino communities in Los Angeles. Boyle Heights through West Adams, South LA, all the way to the beach. And so my parents, who actually never really talked about it, when they moved to Los Angeles, experienced being one of those families that had to move from where the freeway was being constructed into another area in Los Angeles. But in our case, my parents stayed in the same area. So we've lived in the community that we're in for over 60 years, but it's under major gentrification. And so our family history in this community is under, attack. And so I'm not sure how much longer we'll be in a community that I was born and raised and that my children and our family know as home. Basically, this is what I'm talking about when an extractive community of redlining, which took place between the 1930s to the 1960s. Disenfranchisement and displacement still exist today under new unjust practices, laws, and capitalism, as I've just shared with you. The photo at the bottom right is a current photo that I've taken in my existing community, which you can see the streets are not in good shape, and that in terms of investment, even to this day, lack. Also, there was the creation of the Negro Motorist Green Book, which was created between 1936 and 1967. This story, because I've lived long enough to, I was 7 in 1967. Basically, I don't remember my parents using this book, but I knew they knew by this point, kind of the places to go when we traveled to Louisiana or Kansas City or Oklahoma. There were certain gas stations, restaurants, the time of day that we would travel from one state to the next. And I asked my mom, who's still living, is 99 years old, hey Mom, did you guys ever use the Green Book? And she's like, no, we didn't use the Green Book. But it's, it's one of those things where it becomes a part of the practices that's passed down from one family member to another, from one generation to another. Also noting that even though the Green Book was created for the safety of African Americans traveling across the U.S., harm and death continue to plague the Black and brown lives as it relates to the practices of police enforcement and unjust criminalization, as Anthony shared some of the stats on that. And just to kind of tap into some of the amazing work that's being done in Los Angeles by an organization called the Advancement Project that has changed their name to, I think it's the Catless Coalition now. They just recently changed. They are a national civil rights organization that really works in the area of housing, transportation, and from the standpoint of enforcement, and also another organization called ACT LA. So there's amazing resources that are available as models that you can use in the work that you do, so that it's not like you have to reinvent the wheel in terms of the mobility justice work that you would like to incorporate in your organizations. Moving into one of the projects that I've worked on over the past couple of years, Biking While Black. Well, one of the guides that really helped me to do this film as really a first-time filmmaker and documentary work, and it was actually the first one we did last summer, was only 9 minutes, but it was a very impactful message from the standpoint that we lack of these gathered narratives of the reality of mobility justice and the transportation equity issues. So this particular policy brief notes that Black lives need to be prioritized in Los Angeles because while we only make up 9% of the population in the city and county of Los Angeles, it is overrepresented in terms of the harm and deaths that are occurring from traffic violence, as well as bicycling and pedestrian fatalities and or harm, which then go back to the divestment, and also that our communities are not set up to really safely move around within. So Black victims are just simply represented in terms of traffic collisions by every mode of travel. And just noting that data like this particular policy brief really helped lead the work that I was doing in my documentary work, because there's one thing to share in a narrative, which in some cases can feel emotional, but when you back it with data, which is real, it's factual, then it's even more powerful. So storytelling with data is definitely, and real data, as well as collaborations and the partnerships with folks that are actually doing the work, is very impactful, it's very radical, and it really is a regenerative process, because what we're doing is we're working to build sustainability in a way that creates a better future for our children, also just in terms of our well-being and our psyche as a whole as human beings. Transitioning into a regenerative economy and mobility justice, and that need to prioritize Black lives, also notes that Black pedestrians face the highest disparities, representing 18% of all collision victims, more than 2 times the city's Black population. Also, Latino victims and Latina victims are also overrepresented among walking and cycling victims, with Latinas and Latinas as cycling representing the majority of bicycling victims. Just a week or two ago, my daughter, who has Citizens app, I don't know if you guys have some type of app that alerts you when there's pedestrian fatalities or accidents, and now we've become the superheroes of going out in the community and documenting in some way what's happening in our community. So she comes to me at midnight, "Mommy, somebody just got hit on a bike right down the street." We had our pajamas on, threw our clothes on like Superman, and headed out to document and to actually see what's happening in our community. You know, it's a deep connection to basically to be there, and then with the streets were totally empty. Actually, I was involved for the past 4 years in the reconfiguration of this particular boulevard, the Adams Boulevard corridor, which is what you see in this map here. And this was considered a high injury network by the Department of Transportation because of the speeding, but also because of the infrastructure design of not having enough stoplights. We had 2 lanes going opposite directions, and this particular corridor was reconfigured to 1 lane. That was first, to save lives. And because of that, we were able to create a bike lane. So again, people kind of think that this project was a gentrification project because so much gentrification is happening in our community. But through the involvement of me and other people that look like me, I'm able to talk to the community and say, no, this is no way a gentrification project. This is a safety project. Lives matter. And actually, more Black and brown lives are the ones that are being killed in this community. Don't you want to make a difference? Don't you want to be a part of actually safety that actually provides more sustainable communities for the people that actually live in this community? So this is kind of an ongoing conversation to even separate the topic and the activities of gentrification from transportation safety projects. And also the fact that, hey, have you ever even rode a bike? Have you ever even walked in the community? So it's very complex and it's very intersectional. And so this is all a part of what mobility justice really is tapping into. Again, you see we're progressing, and my daughter's in this as we're growing, as we're learning. And so we're right down the street at a park in our community. And this was a part of the beginning of the Ride and Live in Color, which started in 2011. Basically, my background also, my undergrad degree, I went to Otis. So communication, designs, graphics, marketing is actually a part of the skill set that I'm able to really pump up the work that I do. So we went down and we really wanted to pump up the she power and also the youth in terms of their involvement. And this also speaks to our community in terms of the electrical towers, you know, that are also in our community, where you wouldn't maybe see these in some of the more wealthier communities. So between 2011 and 2022, I evolved into questioning, as I mentioned earlier, why I didn't see more Black, Indigenous, Latinx people riding bikes. As a Black life, I love bicycling, and I wanted that to change. Most of my adult years, I made the choice to take the road less traveled. I experienced the power of bicycling, and then basically that is what ignited an effort called The Ride in Living Color. It actually started out as a documentary project, but I realized that's a lot of work. And that's going to take, a lot more learning. It's going to take a lot more understanding of what it is that I'm really trying to do in my community and empower my community and get more people on bikes. So that's how we've transitioned into it becoming an initiative. And Anthony's right there in the picture with the black jacket to the upper left. And that's when we met. That was the first weekend we met at an event that he hosted along with his colleagues in Oakland. There's Angela Davis, who also is a bike rider, and also Tony Coleman, who was in Oakland, who passed away recently. And it was just the most amazing weekend, and it really just fired me up, to have these conversations I never had before, to hear these narratives and to see people of color so excited about bike riding, and we all were evolving into, so what does that mean? Where is this going to take us? One thing for sure, we were in good shape. This is also what led me to, as the actually 11 years have passed, to evolve into creating my own consulting company, Yolanda Davis-Overstreet Consulting, where I recently finished a project with Department of Transportation and taking the corridor project that I showed recently to do more education and engagement. It was only a 3-month project, and you can consider it like a pilot, but it also just shows we need more than 3 months. We need 3 years. We need more than a 3-month budget. We need a 3-year budget. So these are things I'm just kind of putting out there because they're learned lessons, and we have to be able to sustain them. I had a wonderful working relationship with the staff at Department of Transportation. They're engineers and planners and marketing and outreach, but they don't live in our community. We all have to work together because we all bring something to the table. Also, during COVID, I began the process of understanding what it means to start a community-based organization or project with a fiscal sponsor. So I did a lot of work, talking with a lot of folks, and established a nonprofit project with a fiscal sponsor, a social good fund, and that particular project is called the Ground Truths Network. During COVID, it really taught me how important it is to see each other. Not that I wasn't seeing, my fellow neighbors and colleagues before, but it really showed me what the importance of what this is all about, that we need to be here for each other, the importance of compassion. We take those words lightly, and I think those are some of the key words that have carried me these 11 years of doing what has mostly been community service work, but has been so impactful within our community. And last but not least, because this evening we're going to do the screening, Biking While Black, I was able to take kind of the dream I had of Ride in Living Color 11 years ago, and with much more impact, with much more reasoning, with much more relationships that had been formed over the 11 years, and create the short film, which we have 2 episodes now. We'll see the second one today, Biking While Black. The regenerative economy and mobility justice takes work to change, and it's been difficult, I will say, but it's made me so much more braver. As a Black woman that was speaking about mobility justice between 2011 and 2015, no one was hearing me. No one was seeing me. Furthermore, most of my advocacy work took the form of community service, and community service work means volunteer. The work to change this was often difficult. I didn't have someone coming to me with $100,000 saying, okay, Yolanda, I want you to do this good work. But I continued to evolve and to be the change that I wanted to see. This was an article that was done in 2021 that actually tapped into people of color are dying from traffic violence at a much higher rate, and here's why. This was in the LA Times. I was a co-op, which was basically a collaborative writer in this particular article. Nationwide, immigrants, low-income people, and people of color account for the outsized share of pedestrian deaths. People in low-income neighborhoods where the median per capita income is less than $21,000 are killed while walking at twice the rate of those living in neighborhoods where the per capita income is more than $31,000. And still, even $31,000 is low. But just from a standpoint of looking at mobility justice from the income of that particular neighborhood or that community. And that's really where the intersectionality conversations take place, but it's also where we can be really creative about not only providing support and resources around mobility, but that's where we can also connect in other options like job opportunities, like education. And we can pull in our colleagues that both nonprofit, corporate, and municipalities that can come in together, and we can create a ecosystem that works better for community sustainability, both in movement and livelihood. Also noted in the LA Times article, lower income people and people of color are less likely to have cars and therefore walk more, which I know I'm preaching to the choir right now, but it's also because of infrastructure inequality, civic neglect, gentrification, and suburbanization of poverty. Just to go back to this photo, basically this photo is, and you'll see in some images to come, this was my daughter's middle school where you see no crosswalk. There's a bus stop that basically is behind the students, and then that's the school across the street. So for 7 years, and you'll see this in what's to come, basically it was how can we radically make this particular intersection safe. Now, I was a parent at this time and an advocate and a bicyclist. I didn't work for a large nonprofit that would get in line or to go after an active transportation grant to make a difference. I didn't work at LA DOT, so this was very radical that most people would say it's impossible. Also, when a unhoused pedestrian was killed on that corridor that I showed earlier, basically his name was Jihad Muhammad. He was experiencing homelessness, which is a major factor in death while walking. And so that's an area that just in itself can be a movement that exists for so many. In LA, it's pretty bad. Unhoused folks that are over 50 years old, but we also have students and we also have younger people that are either riding bikes or walking that do not have any other form of transportation but walking. This is actually an ad or kind of flyer, informational flyer that I created on the LA DOT project that I shared with you. And we had a memorial walk for people like Jahid. And basically we met with the neighborhood church and we had a conversation of what does it look like to improve the space so that we can basically all be effective at watching out for each other. This was the project I mentioned with my daughter's middle school, New LA. And so these are some of the activities that you see. This is a historically disenfranchised community. And basically how I started was going to the principal and saying, hey, can I advocate for this school? Can I advocate for this space? I want to be a squeaky wheel to see if we can make this intersection safer. And she pretty much gave me the green light. So everywhere I went, I was advocating not only for my daughter, but I was advocating for the 300 students that were there. Most people would ask me, so who do you work for? And I basically told them, myself and the 300 kids that I'm advocating for. I pulled everybody that I knew to say, hey, come out. Can you stand on corners? You know, can we basically be representative of the change that we wanted to see? This is a friend of mine, Damon Turner, who just shared a testimony about a month ago. And when I asked him to come out and stand on the corner and hold up these signs to have folks slow down, he was like, I don't think this is gonna work, but I'm behind Yolanda, so okay, I'll go stand on the corner and hold the signs. So this is really what it is in terms of advocacy work that I'm talking about, that we basically observe and utilize the available resources. I did this, I didn't have a budget, so I utilized all the resources that I had, all the human energy that was around, all the expertise that was willing to show up. This is how we are moving into transitioning into a regenerative economy, a regenerative mobility. It's a way, and we're doing it as we act it out. We are relearning, we are rethinking, we are reimagining, and we are restructuring how we can sustain safety and life. This is the intersection today. It took 7 years. I was a squeaky wheel. I was a parent that joined with the principal, that joined with students, that joined with my daughter, that showed up at every Safe Routes to School meeting, biking meeting, and simply just shared and planted the seed, that met with the councilman, so that met with basically anyone, quite frankly, that would listen. And today we have crosswalks, traffic lights, school zoning signage at the intersection of Washington Boulevard and Burnside Avenue. This act alone is instrumental in radically making that intersection safer for 300 middle school students, parents, staff, and neighboring community. This story goes on and it evolves in terms of doing work on the corridor of West Adams, which now is about 29,000 community constituents that live in the West Adams community. And the Adams Boulevard corridor is one of the most dangerous corridors in Los Angeles. So I was involved for 4 years again in community service work that basically worked with the Department of Transportation, worked with our council district, worked with the mayor's office. I was a conduit between a lot of these folks. Like our council district deputy really was not into this conversation. So when I'm talking to Department of Transportation, and I'm like, well, he needs to be willed in a little bit more on this and that and the other. So it also takes patience, because guess what? I recognize that I used to be him. I used to be people that did not value or really didn't see the point of having conversations about crosswalks and traffic lights. Let's just get to where we're going. And so to be able to, be aware of that, I think that's also what I bring to the table. So on the Adams Corridor, this is a safety change that has been made for the very people that live here and have been affected by the traffic violence and a disenfranchised community that hasn't been improved for decades. And as I mentioned, this particular change of the corridor, to change it from 2 lanes going opposite directions to 1 and adding a bike lane along with more crosswalks and traffic lights and refuge islands, plays a vital role in the safety of 29,000 plus constituents that live in this community. This is some of the signage that we posted along the corridor, and I worked with engineers and planners, and we basically talked about, how this should work and how we can continue to give webinars and through the neighborhood councils and other organizations, again, whoever will listen to us. So this was a very involved project that if they were not connected with someone in the community, the Department of Transportation would have just put the signs up. That's it, just whoever reads it, great. And a lot of angry community constituents would still be much higher than we have now. We do have some folks that still are not happy with it, but I believe that's kind of an educational project that, again, is not the 3-month project, but the 3-year project. So now we just move into basically today and the regenerative economy, mobility, justice efforts. In September of 2021, Biking While Black, How Safe Are Black Lives Really Bicycling, was launched in 2021. It's a 9-minute and it's documentary, and it's traveled pretty much virtually on YouTube and various social media platforms. It's been viewed and screened in Detroit, where I was last year about this time, also in Oakland at the Bicycle Summit, which we roughly had about a little over 1,000 folks that attended that, and then also in Poland at the UN Habitat Better Cities Film Festival at the 11th World Urban Forum. And through the word of mouth and the grassroots outreach, again, we had a budget through grassroots organization called Go Human, which is under the umbrella of SCAG, which stands for Southern California Association of Governments. That's what funded this particular short film. It was a $7,500 budget in 2021. We created a 9-minute that really tapped into some of our leaders in Los Angeles around transportation, bike co-ops, and also bike advocates. We'll show that tonight. And we've really pretty much had a viewing so far of 26,000 over a, I think, 12-month period. And then we move into this summer. We were awarded 15,000, and we created a 30-minute short documentary. And this one really dives in a little deeper and looks at decriminalization, disenfranchisement, and gentrification. And it expands upon the 9-minute, and it features the actions being taken by our leading bicyclists and BIPOC communities based on what they're doing. And they're paving new roads to tackle the myths, the community safety conditions in Los Angeles, and celebrating Black joy. So mobility justice is possible through intentional actions of observation, listening, engagement, utilizing community resources, human energy, and expertise. But to sustain mobility justice, what is required is a radical shift in the areas of program, project, infrastructure, funding, and investment, collaborative partnerships with CBOs and advocates, and supportive and healing efforts and exchanges for us all. Anthony and I talked, and what we did was kind of just separate real quickly what corporations can do, what municipalities can do, and then what advocates can do. So basically, for the next steps of corporations, some of the ideas, these aren't all, but these are some ideas of steps we can take. Make a commitment to evolving and relearning truth perspectives at the intersection of mobility justice. Establish a learning exchange program to grow your social good work and staff understanding on the intersectionality of mobility justice and transportation initiatives. Support policymakers and legislation that foster more intentional and just mobility and transportation infrastructure, and prioritize donating to CBOs and investing in small businesses that are making meaningful and equitable mobility justice changes in their communities. And lastly, intentional volunteer your time to help sustain local, regional, and statewide mobility justice initiatives and efforts. For our municipalities, you know what I'm saying. I need some water, but what I'm suggesting is collaborative connections with local CBOs and advocates to advance the internal understandings and work on mobility justice, to develop outreach and engagement campaigns and efforts to connect and better align. I'm going to say that again. To connect and better align. Yes, we're already doing outreach campaigns and engagements campaign, but we need to really intentionally make those connections and better align our human energy and work that we've already developed, but maybe aren't as effectively putting it out to the community. And therefore, that we expand upon the ecosystem of mobility justice work being done in your neighborhoods and cities. Include the community and groups less heard at your decision-making tables. That is BIPOC communities, youth, our elders, and disabled. Support emerging activities pursuing their line of work in mobility justice, our grassroots, college students, housing, transportation, and the livelihood necessities. You know, we have to live when we're doing this work. And unfortunately, good work doesn't come with good budgets sometimes. So in terms of really being there and seeing how we can create better ecosystems, and again, intentionally volunteering your time to help sustain local, regional, and statewide mobility justice initiatives and efforts. And lastly, to the advocates in the House. Play a more radical role in communities of color by engaging in efforts that educate and activate mobility justice efforts around walking, biking, public transit at the intersection of disenfranchisement and police enforcement, which you'll hear more about this evening. Explore academic and community-based programs that can evolve your understanding of just mobility for all over oppressed and fragmented mobility. That's what I did 5 years ago. Between all of the work from some of our leading advocates and learning and evolving from being in those circles, I actually went back to school and went into, so our computer went out for some reason. But the last thing I wanted to say was don't underestimate the power of community service work. By stepping up and doing the work, we take and change and transform our stance from looking at our communities as them to we. Thank you very much.